we are here with Professor Eduardo Baistrocchi, who is visiting us in Global Law Program. He is an Associate Professor in Law in London School of Economics, and he has been publishing international tax law. I would start by asking you more about your academic career. How did you become an international tax law, and especially how did you end up in London?
I think that the fundamental legal questions are common around the world. The difference lies fundamentally on how local laws answer those questions. So if you look at the law from this perspective, moving from the academic world in South America to the academic world in the UK, is something that is that can be smooth, because institutions such as Getulio Vargas or Di Tella University in Argentina, like the LSE in the UK, are basically focusing on the same fundamental questions from a theoretical perspective. So to answer your question directly, I started my academic career 15 years ago after having practiced law in Buenos Aires for 10 years. So I became an assistant professor at Universidad Torquato Di Tella in Buenos Aires. And then I moved to the LSE in 2008 as a result of a global competition for a position as an assistant professor in international taxation at the LSE. So moving from Buenos Aires to London was for me quite natural, because I am doing in London what I have been doing in Buenos Aires for over 8 years. That is to say, I have been trying to concentrate on fundamental tax issues that humanity has been facing, and I have been trying to offer a response using an interdisciplinary approach.
I see. It's fascinating. And what are your current research projects in London, of course?
Now I'm focusing on a pretty ambitious project. It is a treatise that will be published by Cambridge University Press. It is entitled A Global Analysis of Tax Treaty Disputes. So in this book I am focusing on the leading tax treaty cases decided by G20 courts over the last century. And with the help of a global network of local tax experts, we have been collecting this data. And my role is twofold. On the one hand, I'm trying to offer a quantitative analysis of what has been going on in this area of international taxation, in order to offer a potential theory to explain its logic. And on the other hand, I am focusing on offering a topic-by-topic analysis. That is to say, I am reviewing each article of the OECD model in the light of actual disputes, from Turkish courts to Brazilian courts to Japanese courts. So I'm trying to turn the light on how the international tax regime works in action, rather than a law in the books approach.
I see. And is there any preliminary results?
I think one fascinating conclusion that I'm gathering from the data is that we are in a context of international tax policy under global anarchy. So countries are trying to survive somehow, so they are using both their internal law and their international tax system in a very harsh competition for capital, for talent, and for tax revenues. So it is a very harsh scenario, because what I can see is basically a global anarchy. My ambition is to try to understand, if it is possible, what have been the driving forces of this global anarchy, and what can be done in order to introduce more rationality to what is going on.
See, and is it like a general in all countries, or can you see any identity between developing countries or different? Is there any identity regarding the conflicts they experience, or There's no relationship at all.
I think all countries are involved in a harsh international tax competition. What I can see is a substantial gap between what politicians say and what they actually do. So I think what is really going on is that a number of countries which are relatively important in international trade are behaving like a cartel. But this cartel is quite unstable because their behavior is opaque. So the actual, the real international tax system is not the one which can be seen from the law. So there is, as far as I can understand, a substantial gap between law in the books and law in action. So the big question here is to what extent it makes sense what the G20 and the OECD has been doing, that is to say, to try to induce cooperation among countries, or alternatively, it is better to think on something very different, which, as other prominent scholars in other parts of the world are saying, that it could be better to think about how to perfect competition rather than impose cooperation.
I see.
So one, I think, important question here is, given that countries are behaving like companies, to what extent applying a global antitrust law to countries could be a way of perfecting competition among countries. Another, I think, fascinating issue in this area is the impact of institutional instability, which is, I think, a problem that many countries will be facing within the next decades because of the difficulties in collecting revenues. And what I see is that when a given country faces political instability, for example, Russia, a new player emerges in this game, which is the local tax authority. Since the local tax authority has a quite relevant political power because they are in charge of collecting money, collecting revenues, they have the incentive to negotiate with the president, be it civilian or military, for tax collection. So if the world is heading to a more unstable scenario, I think a quite important player will emerge, which is the local tax authority.
I see. And do you have any opinion about Brazil? Because we are facing a certain instability.
Brazil, of course, is a major player in this game, and up to now, it has been a unique country. Its tax treaty network is very small. It has about 30 tax treaties, while the other members of the BRICS world, Russia, China, India, and South Africa, already have a pretty substantial network. For example, the network in the BRICS world is normally about 100 tax treaties. So one question I have is, to what extent, given this context of harsh international tax competition among countries, Brazil will keep behaving in such a unique way? For example, one element that strikes me a lot is that while India and China has already implemented APAs and maps system procedures in order to solve disputes, Brazil has been unfriendly towards new ways, methods for solving disputes. So my expectations that within the next couple of decades, Brazil will somehow replicate in its own international tax system what we can see in the Chinese and the Indian tax regime. That is to say, a larger tax treaty network and more methods for solving tax disputes in a negotiable way.
I see. Great. And how do you compare the fields of professional practice in academic work in your area, in Latin America and in Europe?
It seems to me that these two markets, the academic one and the professional one, are somehow converging, in the sense that both good professors and good practitioners need to look at things from an interdisciplinary approach. That is to say, from law and economics, law and finance, law and history, law and politics. Looking at the law as something self-contained, I think, is simply wrong. Now, it is time to look at legal issues I think, from an interdisciplinary approach. And that is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to understand the logic of the international tax regime from a game theoretical perspective or law and history perspective, because it is better to have more than one torch. The law itself is not enough to illuminate what is going on, so we need, I think, more than one torch, and economics and history are two fascinating torches that could further illuminate legal issues.
Yeah, I see. And especially in tax law, this is very clear, because the government needs the revenue to exist. So it's not rational to think about tax law by itself.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that is absolutely correct. I fully agree with your position, Tathiane.
Great. And just one more question. What advices would you give for students or young professionals who wish to pursue an academic or professional career in international tax law?
It seems to me, that we are living in the Asian century. So the center of gravity of the world economy is going east and south, as it was before the first Industrial Revolution. Another thing I see is that, as I said before, it is important for both future professors and future practitioners to look at legal problems from an interdisciplinary approach. And my third advice would be to be able to speak and write in English, because that is the global language. Both China, Russia, etc. are accepting English as the global language. So to make the story short, my advice would be to have a close link with Asia and the OECD world. Try to understand legal issues from an interdisciplinary perspective, and use English as the global language.
I see. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to have you here. I'm quite sure that our students enjoyed a lot, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor.